The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
President Obama arriving in Cuba yesterday, making him the first president to visit Cuba in 88 years. Interestingly, the last presidential visitor to Cuba from the United States, of course, was Calvin Coolidge in 1928, who arrived by battleship. Imagine, Lewis, at that time, if somebody said to him, the next time a president arrives, it will be on a Boeing 747 outfitted with whatever it is that Air Force One has on it. But that is the reality.
Yes, a battleship 88 years ago. I really can't think of a good reason why that is the case, why it took that long.
Well, and we are sort of seeing the lack of logic of the Cuban embargo in the reaction that now Republicans and right-wingers are unhinged about, right? We're hearing right-wingers say, President Obama is rewarding communism and lack of open and fair elections and human rights abuses with a presidential visit. Well, then what are we doing to Saudi Arabia? What exactly are we rewarding with our incredible friendship and alliance with one of the most oppressive Wahhabist regimes? I mean, if that's the standard, think about what we're tacitly endorsing with that alliance.
And if you want the situation in Cuba to improve, do you do it by not involving yourself at all? Or do you do it by trying to interject some democracy and bring them up to speed a bit?
In what way has the Cuban embargo over the last decade upon decade moved Cuba in the direction we would like to see them move? This is the pragmatic end to a ridiculous double standard. It is hopefully the beginning of an era that will start to nudge Cuba out of the status quo. President Obama last night having dinner at one of hundreds of these privately run restaurants that were only recently made permissible in the state-run economy. Starwood Hotels, which does the Westin and a number of other properties. It was recently purchased by Marriott. They've signed a deal with Cuba to manage 2 properties with the intent of managing a third. This is the first hotel deal with Cuba since 1959. Now, I don't know why we want to be cheerleading such overt vulture capitalism and industry consolidation like we're seeing, but as a sort of response to those who say that there is no progress being made in Cuba, there is some progress being made in Cuba without obviously ignoring human rights, horrible human rights situations on part of the island and so many other issues, no doubt about it. But the double standard is really what we should concern ourselves with here.
And it's still shocking to me that people are afraid of communism, right? Or they're pretending to be, because they'll bring that up. What is going to happen? Is Obama gonna catch communism while he's there and come back? And I guess many of these people already consider Obama a communist anyway.
And this is sort of how democratization works, right? The U.S. isn't going to become a communist country because we end the Cuban embargo with Cuba, obviously, any more than we're going to become, hopefully, although Christian Sharia is a concern, any more than we're going to become a Wahhabist regime, a Wahhabist theocracy that sentences atheist bloggers to 2,000 lashes and 10 years in prison like Saudi Arabia. In the same way, though, that the alliance with Saudi Arabia hasn't changed what they do there. The lack of alliance, the embargo with Cuba, has changed nothing over the last 50 years. And this just makes sense. Right-wingers are frothing at the mouth, but I see this as a definitive achievement of the Obama administration.
Agreed. And I think somewhere behind a lot of this is just the fear or the worry that Cubans will just start coming into the United States en masse if we improve relations, and people are afraid of that. And well, as we've discussed extensively, I don't think you need to be afraid of immigration.
And more broadly, this has nothing to do with celebrating any particular element of Cuban life or culture or society or government. What we should be in favor of here is recognizing that the strategy for 50 years hasn't worked, and we should favor diplomacy over aggressiveness and hostility and what we've seen over the last 50 years. You may remember that Utah in 2012 was the reddest state in the country in the presidential election. It had the highest share of the vote go to the Republican candidate Mitt Romney. Now, this could be sort of deceptive in 2012 because the Republican candidate happened to be Mormon, right? Mitt Romney. And Utah is the Mormon capital of the country. But Romney won by a huge 73-25 margin over President Obama. But even if we look back to 2008, Utah was still one of the reddest states. John McCain defeated President Obama there 63-34. I believe 63% was the second highest share for McCain in any state, second only to Wyoming, where he had just over 63%, 65% maybe. And the big news is that a new poll from Deseret News and KSL in Utah has Hillary Clinton 2 points ahead of Donald Trump in a hypothetical matchup there. Now, we still don't know whether Trump or Hillary will be their party's nominees, but those results are stunning. And we also see Bernie Sanders up 48-37 in Utah over Donald Trump in a hypothetical Sanders versus Trump matchup. 16% say that they would skip the election if it were Trump versus Clinton. 9% say they'd skip the election if it was Trump versus Sanders. These are very, very interesting numbers, Lewis.
Well, a friend of the show was working at a Bernie rally over the weekend.
Yeah.
And showed me some footage of the line of people waiting to get into this thing and the people that attended. It was incredible, Dave.
Yeah.
There's a lot of support there.
Now, we have to also bear in mind that, a couple of caveats. Number one, it's only March. So how valuable is any hypothetical matchup in any particular state? This is one poll in one state. And the other issue is, for example, in the Hillary Clinton matchup, she's up 38-36 in the poll. This is within the margin of error. That also leaves 26% of respondents undecided, and they could swing this one way or the other very, very drastically. But the idea that this is even a conversation, that Utah might be, I'm not saying that the Democratic nominee is going to win Utah, but the idea that it could even be remotely close, much closer than it has been in over a decade in Utah, that really does say a lot here.
And I think this is another example of how Trump and Bernie are similar in that Trump supporters, I think Trump has a lot of support. But anyone who identifies as a Republican that doesn't support Trump probably really is repulsed and disgusted with the guy.
High negatives, no question about it. And we have to be clear, Hillary Clinton also has high unfavorable ratings. Both Ted Cruz and John Kasich, the remaining Republican non-Trump candidates in this primary, would defeat either Sanders or Clinton in Utah. So this is not a general Utah situation where Utah Republicans are just moving to the left. This is very specifically about Trump. We don't yet know if this would also see itself replicated in other states, but there is the possibility. And again, you never want to rely on a crazy Republican candidate to ensure a Democratic win, because you could have something happen 3 weeks before the election that drastically changes people's views and throws the entire thing upside down. But the possibility that a Trump nomination could really turn off establishment Republicans so that they either stay home or vote independent or write in whoever their Republican choice was going to be, or maybe some consider voting for the Democrat, this could have a real impact in November on some of these swing states.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be an interesting race. And in a way, I'm kind of happy that Trump is doing so well, because it's just going to make for a fascinating social experiment, really.
Fascinating and incredibly risky for the future of this nation. But hey, what better than to have fun for a few months while the thing goes,
I couldn't agree more.
President Obama, as we talked about last week extensively, has been moving forward on the replacement for the late Antonin Scalia on the Supreme Court by nominating Merrick Garland to replace him. We have heard all sorts of posturing. There have been 6 or 8 Republican senators who say, I would meet with Merrick Garland, although those meetings would be mostly symbolic. They probably wouldn't go anywhere. We've heard from some on the right, even Orrin Hatch, who said, for example, that somebody like Merrick Garland would be a great choice. Even though President Obama has made that choice, Orrin Hatch now saying, actually, we're not going to be moving forward on that. Mitch McConnell was on Fox News Sunday yesterday talking about this nomination, being interviewed about this nomination by Chris Wallace. And he made what is simultaneously a repulsive and stunning, but not that surprising admission, which is How could Republicans move forward with this nomination when the NRA hasn't signed off on Merrick Garland? And I know what you're saying. Wait a second. The people elect the president who nominates Supreme Court nominees. And then the people elect senators who confirm them. NRA. Why does the NRA matter? Oh, it matters, particularly if you're Mitch McConnell. Listen to this.
Nominee.
So final question, just to make it clear. You're saying no consideration of Judge Garland by this Congress, even if Hillary Clinton wins the election. No consideration by this Congress. You're going to stand firm on that, even in a lame duck session.
Yeah, I can't imagine that a Republican majority in the United States Senate would want to confirm in a lame duck session a nominee opposed by the National Rifle Association, the National Federation of Independent Business that represents small businesses that have never taken a position on a Supreme Court appointment before. They're opposed to this guy. I can't imagine that a Republican majority Senate, even if it were soon to be a minority, would want to confirm a judge that would move the court dramatically to the left. That's not going to happen.
Senator McConnell, thank you. Thanks
He's
for your
literally sticking to his guns on this one, right? I mean, confirm it. Wait a second, Chris. You're saying Republicans are going to confirm a nominee that hasn't been okayed by the National Rifle Association, the biggest pro-gun lobby in the country? I just don't see that happening, Chris. Wow.
That's really sad. Really sad. And this really reminds me of this season of House of Cards too, because the NRA, they show the NRA's power, and I don't know how they amassed this power, but they have it. And
the Republicans are really showing themselves to be totally bogus on this, right? Because first the argument was, well, the vacancy should be left open until a new president is elected because, a Republican win in November would be a drastic shift. So we shouldn't let President Obama do his job while he is still president, right? Totally absurd idea. Election year Supreme Court nominations and confirmations are common, but fine. It's a stupid argument, but it's their argument, God damn it. But now, even if Hillary Clinton wins in November, Mitch McConnell is saying, no, we still wouldn't go forward with the confirmation hearings because the NRA is still going to be opposed to Merrick Garland, whether a Democrat or a Republican wins in November. And this all, by the way, comes down to two cases that Merrick Garland was involved in, Parker v. District of Columbia and NRA v. Reno, where apparently Garland's decisions weren't pro-gun enough for the NRA. This is an embarrassment, right? Grasping at straws. We just have to hope that it backfires on Republicans. And we sort of know, because we know Republican voters, there's a good chance it won't backfire, but hopefully it will.
Yeah, the NRA, masterful at purchasing politicians.
Yep.
And those politicians are going to make sure that there's a pro-gun Supreme Court justice. What is going on?
Mitch McConnell knows exactly where his bread is buttered. Let's dispel with this notion that Mitch McConnell doesn't know where his bread is buttered. We're in a race to the bottom here. I'm on Twitter at dpackman. Lewis is on Twitter at lewismotamedy. Send me your thoughts about this crazy, crazy story.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Craig Leaner. Craig, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. You can join Craig and sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. It is the #1 way to support the David Pakman Show. Let me remind you, we have a fantastic membership special going on right now. You can get a membership for 33% off, plus get a free David Pakman Show t-shirt made from 100% recycled materials. And Monday, March 28th, that's 1 week from today, we are giving away 5 pairs of Thrive Elite XT wireless Bluetooth headphones. These aren't even available for purchase yet. They're going to be $80 each when they come out in a couple of weeks. We have been given 5 pairs to give away. All members in good standing as of March 28th are eligible. So, Lewis, whether or not you sign up for this membership special, if you've been a member for a month or a year or 2 years, you're entered. You've been using these headphones. They're fantastic.
I have, yes. Bluetooth, wireless, very handy.
$80 value, and you will be entered to win one of 5 pairs. But you have to go to to davidpakman.com/spring16. I've been getting emails. People are looking around our website for the free t-shirt deal and the 33% discount. There's only one place to do that, and it's davidpakman.com/spring16. It's all happening, Lewis. I mean, it's fantastic. The t-shirts have been, the t-shirt orders have been coming in fast and furious, and everybody's loving it. I mean, I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, my 100 of my 300 t-shirt orders came in Saturday, actually, and it's great, Dave. I'm going to start wearing them maybe 3 or 4 at a time to the studio.
Just to make sure you break them all in. Yeah. davidpakman.com/spring16. Remember, if you ever shop on Amazon.com, you can also support the work we do by going to davidpakman.com/Amazon before you shop. I was thrilled to see that someone in our audience over the last week bought the book, The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler, one of the best novels by one of my favorite authors. I've read every single novel that Raymond Chandler has written. The Big Sleep is a classic, and I believe, Lewis, that it was turned into a really good movie also in the 50s or 60s.
There was a movie, yes. I have not seen it.
I've been thinking, every time I see that, I start thinking I should really reread some of my favorite books. I read everything by Raymond Chandler 6 or 7 years ago. So I haven't read any Chandler for 6 or 7 years, even though he's one of my favorite authors. So there's a case to be made that I should go back and start rereading those. But it's also hard to justify when there's so much stuff I haven't read yet sitting on my nightstand to read. But if I really liked it, it seems worth revisiting, don't you think? There's always a new movie to watch, but why not rewatch movies you like too?
Right, I do that, but that's the same thing with me with movies. There's always a movie I haven't seen, and I feel obligated to watch that instead of watching something I have seen. That's normal.
I took a several-month break from any new documentaries, TV shows, movies, anything, because I just really wanted to rewatch Breaking Bad, and I don't regret it at all. I mean, it was just as good or better the second time through. Exciting stuff, Lewis. Quite a world we live in today. Also, a bunch of hot sauces purchased through our Amazon link. Are you into the whole hot sauce movement? You know, people collect hot sauces, they try different hot sauces, etc.
I can appreciate a good hot sauce, but I don't collect them, and I don't really think I have any at home. So for me, they're good. I enjoy them. They serve a purpose. But for the really, really hot ones, people go crazy for these. There reaches a level where, for me, it's just no longer enjoyable. Yeah,
I'm not at all into the whole trying the super hot sauces. Like, I'll always have 3 at home, usually. I have Cholula, Frank's Red Hot, Sriracha, and also I really like the green Tabasco one, which I think is made from jalapenos, or the green one. It's none of them are really that spicy. And I'll try new hot sauces, but the whole thing of you have to try this one. This one is so hot. Let's see if you can tolerate even a drop of it. Could not care less about that whole thing.
Yeah, why punish yourself, right? Yeah,
I agree. Remember, anything you buy on Amazon can support our show if first you go to davidpakman.com/Amazon. And last thing, quick correction before we move on. Last week in a segment, I referred to Jimmy Buffett as a right-winger. Jimmy Buffett, not a right-winger. He did raise money for President Obama, and I want clarity this evening, every evening really, but today an opportunity to slightly increase my level of clarity. Jimmy Buffett, not a right-winger. Trace Atkins, though, from that segment about Wounded Warrior Project, a right-winger. Let's talk about Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio had a really embarrassing loss in his home state, his so-called home state of Florida, on March 15th. And he suspended his presidential campaign immediately after, saying, I'm out of this Republican primary race. And he said late last week that he's actually going to leave government altogether. He's not going to run for re-election in the Senate. He's not interested in being anyone's vice president. He's not running for governor of Florida. And obviously, although he's interested in being people's president, that's not going to work out for him either. He said, quote, I'm not going to be vice president. I'm not running for governor of Florida. I'm going to finish out my term in the Senate over the next 10 months, and then I'll be a private citizen in January. I hear, Lewis, I am going to be a very well-paid lobbyist in January, although we don't know that for a fact.
Maybe not. Maybe he's fed up. But if you want to be president, and he did want to be president,
presumably,
I don't know why you would just stop. Maybe he's one of those guys who will make some real money in that lobbying world for a while and then have another run in later.
It's tough to be in elected office, leave to be a lobbyist, and then come back and jump right into a presidential race. That is not an easy thing. You sort of want some direct path where, okay, he's a senator, and then maybe he is governor or something else. And a lot of Republican insiders who basically agreed that this was a disastrous run for Marco Rubio, particularly with the embarrassing loss in Florida, most of them still feel that he has a future in politics if he wants one. It's just not clear that he actually does want one here. He wasn't even ready to announce a presidential endorsement. He said, hopefully it's not Trump, but I'm not getting involved in that. I hope we can prevent a Trump nomination. It's amazing how much more reasonable people in how the more reasonable people in the Republican Party slowly get eliminated. There were lots of nuts in there at the beginning, right? Santorum, Mike Huckabee, Bobby Jindal, Carly Fiorina. But Rand Paul and to a great degree Chris Christie were of the more reasonable candidates. They were out very, very early. Now Marco Rubio is out. Kasich is reasonable, kind of, but a lot of recent articles have exposed that Kasich's really good at seeming reasonable, but he's done some disastrous stuff in Ohio, no doubt about that. It just seems like, for whatever reason, and maybe it's a response to President Obama in office for 8 years or seven plus years now, and the resentment that has brought on in many Republicans, the more reasonable Republican candidates basically never stood a chance.
Resentment that exists because of irresponsible media personalities. It's incredible how that works, but that's another story. Yeah, maybe that is it. Maybe only people like Trump can survive in this political climate on that side.
And you have to also remember that Marco Rubio had a huge problem, as our friend Greg Stevens recently emailed and reminded me. Sometimes when we say Rubio did seem very reasonable in a lot of ways, why didn't he get more traction? He does see a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants, and that really does not play well with many in the Republican establishment, particularly those who want a wall that Mexico will supposedly pay for between here and Mexico to stop all Muslim immigration. If Donald Trump's harebrained, half-baked ideas resonate with you, you're probably not going to see eye to eye with the sort of more sober and rational ideas presented by somebody like Marco Rubio or Chris Christie, or in many cases, Rand Paul. Just not, it's two puzzle pieces. They're not only from different puzzles, it's basically like a chess piece and a puzzle piece. They're not going together, Lewis.
It almost doesn't even matter what Rubio says. Think about what we've seen from at Trump rallies and from Trump supporters. Just having the last name Rubio and the first name Marco is probably enough to disqualify you in their eyes.
Yes, certainly for many of them it is. And as we know, sort of the same dynamic applying to Ted Cruz, although to a lesser extent, which is also crazy because when we've talked about Rafael Cruz, Ted Cruz's father, that also seemingly not dissuading some Republican voters. But I would guess that Trump voters presented with video of Rafael Cruz in his thick Spanish accent talking about Ted Cruz being anointed by God probably wouldn't play well with them either, I would guess.
I doubt it, but they do seem to like the Jesus stuff coming from Ted Cruz, generally speaking.
We have a Reddit discussion forum. If you go to davidpakman.com/Reddit, that's REDDIT, you can talk with us about these or any other stories, suggest stories for the show, troll us or other people. It's no holds barred on there, Lewis. davidpakman.com/Reddit. Back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by Katherine Stewart, who is a writer for the New York Times, The Nation, The Guardian, and other publications, as well as the author of The Good News Club, The Christian Right's Stealth Assault on America's Children. So, Katherine, for people who don't know what The Good News Club is, I mean, it sounds pretty good. It's certainly a very nice and sort of unthreatening name. But what are we talking about?
Good News Clubs are programs of religious indoctrination that are installed primarily in public elementary schools around the country. There are approximately 4,000 Good News Clubs operating in public elementary schools today. And it does sound non-threatening. What could be possibly wrong with a group with such a very nice name? But the clubs are sponsored by an organization called the Child Evangelism Fellowship. It's an organization that's based in Missouri. It's has a nationwide presence and is also active internationally in nearly 200 countries. And the purpose of the clubs are really to convert very young children to fundamentalist Christianity and to encourage them to recruit their peers to the club.
And when you say very young, what is the age range that we're talking about?
Good News Clubs are active only in public elementary schools, or almost all in public elementary schools. And their focus really is on the children in their very first years of learning. The centerpiece of their program is called The Wordless Book. It has no words, just pictures and colors and shapes, and it's used to convert children who are too young to read. And, the Good News Clubs are in public schools, which they refer to in their national conventions as mission fields. They call public schools mission fields. They're there because they actually rely on deceit. Good News Clubs deceive very young children into thinking that their school endorses a form of the Christian religion. And they're basically, encouraged to use that misleading perception to try to convert their peers and recruit their peers to the club.
And so what are the logistics of how it works, in the sense of is this happening after school or during school hours? Are all children who are participating, have they received some kind of specific permission from parents? What do the parents know about what's being taught?
That's a very good question. Thanks for asking it. Good News Clubs take place after school, and they do require permission from parents to join. So a lot of parents might think it's not that big a deal. But there are 4 reasons why this is problematic. The first is public schools have a cloak of authority in the minds of small children, regardless if it's, before the bell rings or immediately after. Public schools have a cloak of authority in the minds of small children. They think if something is taught in their school, it must be sponsored by their school. It must be what the school or the state wants them to believe. When a Good News Club came to our public elementary school in Santa Barbara, California, I started hearing stories from other parents in town whose kids went to schools where these Good News Clubs had been established. The kids attending the clubs would find the non-Christian peers and say, "You're going to go to hell because you don't believe in Jesus." And then they would say, "I know it must be true because they taught it to me in school, and they don't teach things in school that aren't true." So the first problem is that even if it's after school, the public school has a kind of cloak of authority in the minds of children, and they use that sort of authority to persuade children that the school is what wants them to believe in this. Also, sometimes teachers who work during the school day are recruited to be Good News Club teachers. So they're teaching, reading and math at 2 o'clock, and by 2:15 they're teaching a Good News Club. And a lot of times, kids know that to do well in class, they have to, do what the teacher wants and sort of please their teacher. So children in those classes feel especially coerced. The second problem with Good News Clubs is that the leaders of the club use these non-threatening labels like non-denominational or interdenominational to describe the club, which leads a lot of parents to think that they represent a sort of inclusive form of Christianity. In fact, most of the leaders I met of the Good News Club and most of the Good News Club teachers I met believe that most Americans who call themselves Christians really aren't, including Catholics, U.S. Episcopalians, United Methodists, forget about the Unitarians, the list goes on. The Good News Club represents an incredibly deeply fundamentalist form of Christianity, and anybody who doubts that should actually read their statement of faith.
And Katherine, what is the legal justification that Good News Clubs have found to exist in what some are saying really is a blurred area between church and state? I mean, the classes are not officially part of the school curriculum, but as you mentioned, in some cases, there's sort of overlap between the teachers teaching in school and then teaching the Good News Club classes. What is the defense that they make anyway to the accusation that this is sort of an establishment of one particular religion at a public school?
Well, until 2001, Good News Clubs were largely excluded from public schools because of Establishment Clause concerns. Establishment Clause is the very first clause of our Constitution, and it ensures a separation, or is supposed to ensure the separation of church and state. But in a key Supreme Court decision in 2001 called Good News Club versus Milford Central School, the conservatives pushing Good News Clubs in public schools argued that religion is not religion after all. It's just speech from a certain point of view. And therefore, these activities should be allowed under the free speech clause of the First Amendment. Now, it raises a really good question. Is religion just speech from a certain point of view? Well, not according to our tax code. Religion is treated very differently from other forms of speech in our tax code. Religions receive annually billions of dollars in tax subsidies. They don't have to adhere to the same kind of transparency as other for-profit and nonprofit groups do. So they're treated differently from speech in our tax code.
That's fascinating, right? I mean, so you have a sort of double standard. On the one hand, presumably the religious organizations want the tax exempt status. I haven't seen any of them jumping around saying, take it away from us. They say this is a specific type of speech that's different in some way. At the same time, with regard to their participation in public schools in this particular way, they say, well, this is just speech. I mean, it's not different because it's religious. It's exactly the same. It's an incredible double standard.
It's a double standard. And consider this. It's treated very differently in our legal code as other forms of speech. Religions are allowed to discriminate against women, against LGBT people, against people of other faiths. Religion is not subject to the same kind of anti-discrimination law that other for-profit and nonprofit groups have to comply with. So, the fact that religions are allowed to engage in this kind of discrimination is precisely one of the reasons why it needs to be kept separate and clear of our government institutions. So, their religious right at this point is kind of trying to have it both ways. When they want the same, when they want their tax subsidies and benefits and the right to discriminate, they say, well, we're a religion, we're allowed to do this. But when they want to get into the public schools, on the same basis as, say, a soccer club, they say, oh, we're not really religion, we're just speech. They're trying to have their cake and eat it too.
Hey, Katherine, the other question that stands out to me as a sort of amazing double standard is, on the one hand, we see huge controversy over any kind of reasonable sex education, even for kids in 5th or 6th grade, right? Sort of on the upper end of this elementary school range, the 11 and the 12-year-olds. And at the same time, you have parents who say, hey, teaching 5 and 6-year-olds thousands of references to sin and hell and sinful hearts and deserving to die and all this type of stuff. How is it that reasonable same-sex education is too controversial, the kids can't handle it, but teaching them that they may be damned to hell for all of eternity, that's fine?
It's interesting. There was an independent study of the Good News Club curriculum, which is taught in every Good News Club coast to coast. It's a standardized curriculum. And they found thousands of references to sin and hell and punishment. It's a very authoritarian form of the Christian faith, which is very diverse, as you know.
Right.
But it's a very, very authoritarian, very deeply conservative form. And by comparison, that same study found only 2 or 3 glancing references to the golden rule or the royal law, loving your neighbor as yourself. So it's a very specific interpretation of the Christian faith. But yes, you're right about that, in particular with sex education. When teenagers are, taught fact-based sex education and they're taught sort of anti-bullying techniques. When they're taught anti-bullying in public high schools, you shouldn't bully on the basis of sexual identity or orientation, etc. The religious right goes wild. And yet there they are trying to indoctrinate other people's children in their public elementary schools.
Last thing in the very limited time we have left, what can parents do proactively if they're aware that their children are in school districts where the Good News Club is an option? What can they do to activate against it?
I think it's really important for parents to, number one, educate themselves and others about the fundamentalism at the heart of the Good News Club, and try to sort of help other parents understand this so that people really know what they're getting into. A lot of parents that I've spoken with signed their kids up for the clubs thinking, oh, it's going to be okay. They'll just, teach them to be like, obey their parents and be nice to their peers. And then, the kids come home, they say, Mommy, we're going to go to hell because we go to a Catholic church. We go to the wrong kind of church. So I think they really need to educate themselves about the fundamentalism at the heart of the clubs. They need to introduce into schools anti-bullying programs that specifically address the issue of faith-based bullying and bigotry. Because if you have a Good News Club active in your kid's public school, chances are, you need to be prepared for some kind of faith-based bullying and bigotry that's gonna take place. I'd really like to see, the larger picture, a policy, legal policy, legal strategy pursued that affirms the distinction between religion and speech, and that kind of strengthens our First Amendment principles. Our very first, clause of the very First Amendment is the Establishment Clause, which is supposed to ensure separation of church and state in our Constitution, has the best piece of real estate in our Constitution, and I think it's there for a reason.
All right, the book is The Good News Club, The Christian Right Stealth Assault on America's Children. We've been speaking with the book's author, Katherine Stewart. Thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate it.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Televangelist Rick Joyner was the special guest last week on the Jim Bakker Show, where he provided a mathematical proof, and I use that term proof very, very loosely, as you will soon see, that the Earth has only been around for about 6,000 years and that we are approaching the end times very, very quickly. For context, as a reminder, back in 2015, Rick Joyner claimed that the New England Patriots Super Bowl win was a message from God. I'm a huge Patriots fan. Even I'm not stupid enough to believe that. Back in 2013, Rick Joyner predicted that democracy was doomed because of Barack Obama unless the Lord imposed martial law, which, by the way, still hasn't happened. This is the show where there's constantly bulk food being offered for purchase to prepare yourself for the coming calamity. You can buy, if you ever need 60 pounds of oats, Lewis, this is the show to order that.
My question is, are those oats vacuum sealed?
I have no idea. I'm sure they claim to have it all set for the coming apocalypse. Anyway, let's see if you can understand his mathematical proof here. I've looked over the numbers a bunch of times, and I can't understand them. And it's just simple arithmetic. Let's take a look.
But, you can add up the genealogies in Scripture and find that from the time of Adam until today, there's been about 6,000 years. There's one period in the Judges that's a little ambiguous, so you have to give or take 100 years, but we've been on earth since Adam about 6,000 years. Mm-hmm. And, that's 6 prophetic days. Peter said, a day with the Lord is 1,000 years.
Yes.
Right.
And they really understood this.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those writings of the early church fathers, they would be clear about there will be 6,000 years until the end of this age. Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath,
right,
which is the 7th prophetic day. He wasn't talking about being the Lord of one day of the week. He was talking about the millennial day, the millennial 1,000-year period in which Jesus will come to earth himself to rule. And so we are, according to the timelines given in Scripture, somewhere near the end of the 6th day. And if you look at the first 7 days of creation prophetically, you see parallels during each 1,000-year period of man's history that you could see a metaphor for that in the days of creation. It's an amazing thing. But what happened at the end of the 6th day?
Yeah, tell us.
God created man in his image, and I believe it's going to be at the end of the 6th day. By the way, when they in the New Testament said, we're living in the last days, they were talking about the last days of the prophetic week.
Yeah.
They weren't talking about saying we're at the end of the age now. They were saying we're in the last days of this prophetic week. They knew it was about 2,000 years. Some of them even clearly wrote it, of the early church fathers, about the timing. But I believe as man was created at the end of the sixth day, you're going to see the new creation man come forth at the end of the sixth prophetic day. I believe we're going to see the body of Christ become all that it was called to be, to walk in all the authority and power it's called to walk in, being the new.
Any day now, Christ is going to walk in with all the authority and power. This is the dumbest mathematical proof I've ever heard of, Lewis. I mean, usually mathematical proofs are so complex that they're hard to understand. This one is hard to understand because it's so stupid.
It just takes one line from the Bible that a day with God is 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And that's what you have. I'm not sure how the rest of it works. I'm not sure about any of this, really.
I wish he had like a little.
I don't even know if he's sure about this.
I wish he had a whiteboard where he could show his work on this thing. And by the way, it all assumes the Earth is 6,000 years old. It's just crazy. When I look at people like Rick Joyner and hear them speak, I get the sense that he would have trouble counting his toes. Never mind proving that we're in the end times.
Yeah. He does seem like one of those guys. And he said that Jesus was the Lord of the Sabbath.
Right.
I could have sworn Tony Iommi was the Lord of the Sabbath.
So many groups and religious zealots have been proving that we're in the end times for like 1,000 years at minimum. And then this guy comes up with the Sabbath line. I wonder if he gets a cut of however many bulk packages of powdered milk or whatever they sell while he's presenting his math.
If you really want to have a good time, find videos from this guy on YouTube.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing.
And then look at the comments, where these people come from. I would love to know.
If you haven't been following the situation in South Sudan lately, I'll mention that after gaining independence from Sudan in 2011, South Sudan has erupted into a civil war. In December of 2013, this really ramped up, and it set up a cycle of retaliatory killings, which have split the incredibly poor, landlocked country along ethnic lines. And now a UN rights office says that South Sudan is experiencing one of the most horrendous human rights situations in the world. And according to this new UN report, South Sudan allows fighters to rape women as payment. A quote from the report: the assessment team received information that the armed militias who carry out attacks together with the South Sudanese army commit violations under an agreement of do what you can and take what you can. Most of the youth, therefore, also raided cattle, stole personal property, raped and abducted women and girls as a form of payment. And in the report, the UN Human Rights Office just painted what is a horrible picture of civilians supporting the opposition, including children being burned alive, being suffocated in shipping containers, those who support the opposition, hangings in trees, dismemberings. I mean, just horrible, horrible stuff here. And UN Human Rights Chief Zaid Ra'ad al-Hussein said that the brutal rapes have been used since systematically as an instrument of terror and weapon of war. And if you as horrible as this sounds, ancient wars were often fought in this way, Lewis, right? The ground soldiers were paid by committing what we call war crimes today. And in a similar way to we feel ISIS is living in the past in many ways. This is quite precisely the way it used to be to fight these wars, and it is just absolutely sickening.
Yeah. Well, a long time ago, the idea was do everything you can to strike as much fear into the hearts of your enemies as possible.
Yeah, and this strikes fear in for generations, right? The systematic rape of people.
Yeah. So it is a very, very ancient strategy, no doubt about that.
But employed recently, right? I mean, we've talked about the systematic rape in so many of these conflicts. Look at the actions of the Pakistani army in the Bangladesh Liberation War in the 1970s. And from the point of view of analyzing humanity, it's incredible how a country is able to organize itself and become a sovereign entity so quickly, right? South Sudan separating from Sudan, becoming its own country, and then so quickly descend into total barbarism, right? I mean, it all happens very, very quickly.
Yeah, well, not that Sudan is the pillar of
progress.
Progress or stability.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does seem to happen very quickly, oftentimes.
I have a voicemail number that you can call absolutely any time of day. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is the occasional positive voicemail that we receive every once in a while. Take a listen.
Hey, David. My name is Joseph Salama. I am a resident in Southern California. I am going to vote for Bernie Sanders on June 7th. And I just wanted to give you a good big thank you for doing what you do. It's very helpful. The way you report on things, the way you comment on things. Your voice is very relaxing sometimes when things are getting hectic in the day-to-day. I appreciate you making videos and putting them up on YouTube. I really do. And I just appreciate you, man. I appreciate you.
All right. Very nice voicemail. And yes,
Yeah.
my voice known to put some people to sleep. I think he was saying it's just good to have a rational voice, but the way he said it, relaxing, suggests that it's putting him to sleep, which has been known to happen. On the bonus show today, we will talk about the St. Patrick's Day parade here in Boston. It is just absurdly crazy, and both Lewis and I have some thoughts on it. We will talk about a crazy video circulating of a Chinese group of tourists at a buffet. It has led to a lot of sort of social critiques of mainlanders from China, but also a lot of accusations of nativism or I don't even really know what to call it, but bias against Chinese. We will also talk about a tennis player who says that indeed men should make more money. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. DavidPakman.com/spring16. That's how you get a third off your membership price and a free David Pakman Show t-shirt. Sign up today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.